Nothing ruins a ride quite like the sound of screechy, contaminated brakes. But don't worry, I'm here to help, and all you'll be needing is something like disc brake cleaner and a bit of elbow grease. So noisy brakes are usually contaminated brakes. So what I mean by that is something has got their way onto the discs or the pads that shouldn't be there. So for example, you could have got some dirt or some mud on either of those, and then they'll become a bit noisy. Perhaps you accidentally get grease or suspension oil or even the oil from your hands on those discs, then that can contaminate them too. Sometimes pads and discs even can become glazed or scorched. Now that means that they've overheated excessively, perhaps prolonged braking, for example, and it's become a hardened material that's not going to give you enough friction to brake. And that kind of acts a bit like a contaminant. But in both instances, what you've done is you've reduced the friction in your brakes. They're no longer performing great, and they're also making a lot of noise because of it. So hopefully cleaning them up and roughing them up, regardless of what you've contaminated them with or whether you've glazed them, should help you out. So let me show you what you need. So all you really need is something to clean your discs and your brakes. So disc brake cleaner is the obvious choice. Now the reason why is because it dissolves oils and greases and then evaporates to leave them nice and clean. And a bike specific disc brake cleaner will be, well, it will be a spray as opposed to say isopropyl alcohol, which does a similar thing, but you will need to apply it with a rag or a cloth and then wait for it to evaporate. Whereas this can be sprayed on, so it's a little handier. Also, it's safe to be used on bikes. So there are some sprays out there and alcohols out there that are not safe on certain metals and certain materials that you'll find on your bike. So to be safe, I would go for a bike specific one. So aside from that, you might want to use something like some blue roll because you can clean things up and then dispose of it and not contaminate anything else. Or you can use a microfiber cloth. I go for microfiber because it doesn't leave any particles or bits on your discs or in your brake pads, which could cause more trouble in the future. If you want to be really fancy, you can get yourself a nylon brush or even a toothbrush, something soft, so that you can polish up your pads and get rid of any excess that may be hanging around on your pads, like disc brake dust, for example. So if you want to remove your discs so you can give them a really good clean, then you'll need the appropriate tools. So if you have 6-bolt or if you have center lock, you'll need the appropriate tools. So usually you'll need a T25 for the 6 bolts, or you'll need a lock ring tool like this to remove the center locks. But you don't have to remove your discs. The only thing you do have to remove is your pads, and they're usually held in by a small bolt like this. And this one is a very small Allen key. Sometimes they're Phillips, sometimes they're flathead. Check out what yours is because you'll need to take your pads out of the calipers. And finally, you'll need some workshop gloves like these so that they protect your hands from any oils or anything you're using, especially isopropyl alcohol, which can be a little bit harsh on the skin, but also we're protecting the discs from your hands because even the oil from your skin can contaminate the pads and the discs. So to clean up your discs and your pads, firstly, you want to remove your wheel so you get easier access to the disc and to the pads. So at this point, I'm going to be putting on my maintenance gloves, and because I'm going to be taking out the pads, I'll be needing the tool appropriate for removing the retaining bolt, and that for me is a flathead screwdriver. So ta-da! You might need to remove a spring clip from the bolt, and we loosen this off. So once your bolt's out, your pads should slide out, usually from the top. And don't worry if they fall apart, we'll put them back together in a minute. So I'm going to start with cleaning the disc, and like I said, you can take it off if you want to. I don't think I need to. And usually a disc brake cleaner you can just spray on your bike or just here and let it evaporate. But because we're dealing with potentially a contaminated disc here, I want to give it a good scrub. So I've gone for the PT's microfiber cloth because, like I said earlier, it won't leave any particles lying around on that disc afterwards. So let's give it a spray. Wow, look at that. And I like to give the calipers a little spray with the disc brake cleaner as well. So in here, just in case there's any oils or any brake fluid that's worked its way around the pistons. And with our cloth, and this is why it's a great reason to have a cloth or a clean rag rather than blue roll, is that you can pull it through and kind of give it a bit of a floss here just to clean it up. So I've got a bit of kitchen roll here because I just want to show you how dirty these can get, and especially with braking dust. So similar to cleaning your calipers and your discs, you're going to want your disc brake cleaner or your isopropyl alcohol and give those pads a good soaking. Now, I might let it sit for a little bit, but generally what I like to do with the pads is give them a good brush, because as you saw a minute ago, there can be a bit of a build-up of braking dust, and the contaminants are more likely to be in here than in your discs. So get your toothbrush or your nylon brush and give them a good scrub, and then we want to clean them off again. Maybe get your cloth and wipe them down until they start to look like new pads again. Now, if you think that your pads are glazed, so if they're really shiny, then they're probably glazed, which means that they've heated up too quickly or too much and they've become a bit shiny and hardened. So a bit of sandpaper, perhaps a 100 or a 120 grit will be fine, just to rough up the surfaces a little bit. You're not really grinding it down, but you're just taking the top layer off, and that'll help with cleaning up any contaminants that are in the top layer as well. And once you think you're done with them, then it's time to get them back on the bike, but you'll only know for sure whether it's worked once you start bedding them in. So let's get them in the calipers. So now you've got your clean pads and you want to reassemble them, and they will usually go top in first, and do check to see if there is a left or right that needs to be aligned in your calipers. It will be written an L or an R on the pads, and get those in, and don't forget to put your retaining bolt back in, and if you had one of those little safety clips, then that will need to go on the end when you're done. And of course we need to put the wheel back in the bike like so, and do your axle up to the appropriate tightness. But you are not done just yet, because if you've given your brakes a vigorous clean, and especially if you've used the sanding paper on the pads or the discs, you may need to go and bed your brakes in again. Yes, I know you've done them once probably, but now all we need to do is make sure that the material from the pads is appropriately deposited on the discs and all the friction is working as it should, so that they perform as they should. So go and bed your brakes in, and then we should all be good. So hopefully you've got nice quiet brakes now, but if you've done this process and you've bedded in your brakes and it hasn't worked, you can try repeating it, but sometimes there are pads out there that are too far gone, they're too far contaminated, and you might not be able to save them, which means you will have to replace them. Now, it's usually the pads that need replacing, so you can replace the pads, bed them in with your old discs, see how you get on. But if they're still noisy and there's still a problem, the problem might be in the discs, so you'll need to replace those too. Hopefully it won't come to that, so let me know how you get on down in the comments below, and best of luck with making that nice quiet bike.